Well, let's jump in. Dan, welcome to Design Better, our first AMA together.
I love it. This is thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here and talk about design systems and talk to you too. And what an awesome group of folks in the chat from all around the world. This is really exciting.
Yeah.
This is great.
Super cool.
Maybe we can start from the top, Dan. Tell us about how you got deep into the design system space and kind of became an expert on this subject.
I think it's a lot of right time, right place. You know, a lot of it is luck. A lot of it is I've done some work to increase my odds in some of that luck, you know, as much as I can. But a lot of it is right time, right place. I started an agency in 2012 called Super Friendly, and you know, we were doing apps and websites and all sorts of digital stuff for our clients. And around that time was the time that folks are starting to think about how to do digital in a way that scaled better. You know, the web had become crucial to people's businesses, and digital and the iPhone coming out and mobile and responsive, all of those were converging, and people were doing that in a more mature way and just looking for better ways to do that work. You know, designers and engineers and writers and content folks and project managers. And around that time, the idea of design systems were coming up. And a lot of the folks that I'd work with, both clients and our super friends that I brought onto projects, were just really interested in the idea of creating systems to make our work better. And one of those things was I was able to work with Brad Frost and Josh Clark on some projects early 2013, doing work for places like TechCrunch and Entertainment Weekly. And I remember there was one day that we were all sitting around a table, and Brad Frost says, hey, all, I want to show you this idea that I've been working on that kind of blends web design and chemistry. And we're like, okay, weird. Yeah, cool. And that eventually ended up being atomic design. You know, he had this kind of premise that he'd been working on for a while. And he said, like, I'd love to try this out, in working a little bit differently than we might have used to. And so lucky to be on the ground floor with atomic design and working that way. So all of those things kind of converged into a place that we started doing that work more because we liked it, and our clients started asking for it more. And so we just focused around 2015, I think, I decided that my agency, we're just going to focus on doing design system work. We weren't going to do too many apps or microsites or campaigns or advertising or anything like that, and just do design system work with in-house teams at enterprises. And we grew a big specialty from there. And I've been lucky to work with some of the most impressive and interesting, you know, organizations in the world at scale, and working with them on their design systems, and been able to kind of gain that experience. So very lucky to be part of all that.
Awesome. Well, we have a bunch of questions coming in. So Eli, you want to choose one that we can get started with?
Yeah. And I wanted to highlight too that folks can like upvote questions if they're particularly interested in one of them. And one that's gotten a few votes here is from Darko Stamirov. What's the best way to document interactions in design systems, things that are beyond visual and not easy to grasp?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that, Darko. The way that I think about documentation is a little bit different than I think some folks talk about it. The way that I like to talk about it is first to make that idea of it lighter. I think a lot of people, you know, ideally want to do documentation. They know it's good, but it's kind of a drag, right? It's like a lot of people are busy on the work that they're doing. And then to think about, like, after you're done the work, before you move on to the next thing, you have to document in detail this thing. It just doesn't get done a lot. So a lot of my focus on documentation is how to make it light, how to make it part of the process. And that's generally documentation in general, not just for interactions. So I like to talk about documentation as chronicling instead. So instead of thinking about it of like documenting, which I think makes a lot of people think that they have to write a gigantic spec document, I say just chronicle what you've done. You know, almost think about it like journaling. And when you think about journaling, you know, when's the best time to journal for the day? Sometimes at the end of that day. If you tried to journal at the end of the week for all the day, you just forget details, you know? So when you're doing something, just write down a few notes, just chronicle it. And for some folks that are going to be reading that documentation, that chronicling could be written. It could be, you know, opening up a notes doc or something like that, or a Google Doc or a Notion doc, something like that. For some folks, it's just recording your screen. That can act as a way to chronicle. And so that's my general take on documentation. I think that applies really well to interactions as well. And especially with interactions, video is a great method for chronicling that. It's hard to write and describe interactions without using sound and visuals and things like that. So a lot of times just recording your screen acts as a really great mechanism for doing that. And I'm a big fan of lightweight recording tools, things like Clean Shot or Loom, or even just, opening QuickTime or something like that and taking a screen recording. Those tools are really great for chronicling and cataloging. So that's the way that I've done it with teams, and specifically with teams who consume video as a way to document. Teams that don't do that as much, you might have to fall back on some written stuff. But I like very small, lightweight video tools for doing that kind of stuff.
That's great. Here's another question from Lilith. How do you talk about or make sure your worth is seen as a product designer in such a niche part of the business when layoffs are constantly looming?
Oh, wow, super important question, Lilith. Thank you for asking that question. It is a tough time right now in tech in general. There are lots of people who are looking, and it's a weird time too. There are lots of people that are looking for jobs, and there are lots of companies that are laying off, and yet people are still having a tough time hiring and finding jobs. It's like, how does that exist? Both sides of the market need things that complement each other, and yet folks can't find jobs in general. Folks can't hire fast enough. So something is broken, something is weird, something is going on there. Design systems, in my experience, as someone who has run an agency trying to sell that work to clients, and also someone who helps internal teams with it, design systems are one of the first things to be cut, because a lot of people see them as non-crucial. A lot of them see them as a cost center, and they see them as like, well, this is a thing that helps us do work better, but it's not really important to the way that we do work. So that's the thing that I try to prove when I'm working with a team as quickly as possible, that this is important to the way that we do work, right? What sorts of things don't get cut at your organization, right? So some folks, the design team gets cut, the UX team gets cut, but for example, in a heavy engineering culture, engineers don't get cut. So if that's a thing that's important to your organization, tie the design system to that effort. If for some organizations, they wouldn't dream of cutting designers, but they might dream of cutting engineers because design is very important, or UX is very important, or content is very important. So every organization has a priority that they're like, this is crucial to our work, and all the other things are either an optimization or an add-on or a nice to have. You want to tie your design system work to the crucial stuff as early as you can. So if it's engineering, make sure every engineer at the company is able to say, oh yeah, we wouldn't be able to do work without our design system. And that's different than we wouldn't be able to do work as fast, or we wouldn't be able to do work at a high quality, because those are still treated as optional, but we just wouldn't be able to work, period. Right? So think of something in your company that you wouldn't be able to do work without. For some of you, it's Figma. Like, we could not work without Figma. Or for some of you, it's we could not work without React or without Jira or without, you have to make your design system look like one of those things and be as crucial in order for people to go, we couldn't possibly cut that. Otherwise, we're really cutting a crucial part of our business.
Taylor is asking, how do you handle bottlenecks working in a smaller company? About 10 folks, there tends to be a bottleneck with CEO founders for approval. Do you have any recommendations in how to make a better system for getting around that or working with it?
Thanks for that question, Taylor. I have a bit of a, I don't know, contrarian answer to that. I'm not sure. When you do press, for example, one of the tenets around doing press is that you always control the story. Right? If something scandalous is going to happen, you get out ahead of the story so you can control the story. And I have a little bit of a similar approach to design systems too. It's a little bit of an upstart mentality here, which is that how do you handle bottlenecks? Well, you actually create the bottleneck. Like, that's the thing that you do. You get ahead of that story. And what do I mean by that? When I work with teams, one of the things that I tell them as early as possible is define your capacity before people make their own expectations. So for example, if you said to your company, your designers or engineers or the product teams or anything like that, we're going to start a design system, and you don't tell them anything else other than that, they'll start to form their own expectations of what that means. And for a lot of people, it's okay, well, we're going to have our own version of material design here, within a year or within the next 6 months. So before they form that expectation, you set that expectation for them. So what I'll tell a lot of teams is, when you say we're going to start a design system, and our goal is to get it up by a year from now, add to that, the message that you add to that is, and we're going to release one component per month. So now you've set the capacity. Now you've said within the year, we're going to have 12 components and no more. And it's even better if you can say, these are the 12 components that we're going to be launching within the year, because I think it sets people's expectations and it creates a positive bottleneck. I don't know if that exists. I just made that up right now, but it creates this sort of positive bottleneck where people go, well, I need an autocomplete component. And it looks like it's not on the roadmap, at least for the next year for the design system team. So I guess I'll create that on my own. I guess I'm on my own for that one. And that might seem a little bit disappointing to both the design system team, but and also the person who wants that, but it's also realistic, you know. So now they know what to expect. So I'm a big fan, you know, all that to say, I'm a big fan of creating those bottlenecks. And maybe another way to say that is just creating those expectations around bottleneck, you know, around like, this is the capacity that we have, and this is the thing that we're going to do with that capacity. And with that small amount of capacity, especially for small teams, we're going to do the work that is most important. So yeah, autocomplete isn't the most important work for us to do right now. So it's not on our immediate roadmap. We might get to that in 2025. You know, and so if you want to be interested, if you want to be involved in that, sign up for it to be part of that 2025 effort. But until then, you know, you can set the expectations so that people don't feel like they're just waiting for something that never actually arrives.
Here's a question from a larger company. Joanna Kirtley is asking, what are some of the best ways you've seen to measure design system adoption or adherence? We can see when teams at our large enterprise company download our NPM package, but not a great way to see how they're using it.
Awesome, Joanna. Thank you for that question. Joanna is a friend of mine. We've talked before about design systems too. It's an important question to measure adoption. So I want to answer this in two parts. One is I want to answer the question directly: how should we measure and how can we measure adoption? I also want to show you and maybe say a couple of things about how there might be some better metrics to track than adoption too. So I've got a couple of opinions about that. So let's start on the first one. With measuring adoption, the baseline usually is some sort of quantitative dynamic metric, right? That can be visualized in a dashboard. A lot of teams are doing that. The big one that comes to mind for me is the Segment team, who got acquired by Twilio a couple years ago. They created a dashboard for adoption in their evergreen design system. And they open sourced it, which is why it's so popular. They open sourced it, they put it on GitHub, and it's basically an NPM package that you install. So exactly what Joanna had mentioned here in the question, like you can create an NPM package, a dependency in your coding tools, in your dev environment that dynamically pings something. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but I believe that they just ping when someone uses that component in some of their builds. There are also really great tools that are coming out now that are doing that. I think for years, we just didn't have that. So a lot of teams had to either build their own, which a lot of teams don't have the bandwidth to do that, or they had to like do some sort of manual tracking. I've worked with teams where like every Friday, we just go and check, you know, we look at all the code bases and we tally them manually in a Google spreadsheet. That was the best way to do it. And I'm still in favor of those ways, but we're seeing new tools. The team at Zeppelin created a new tool called Omelet recently in the last 6 months or so that I think is in public beta maybe now. And it's a package that helps you, you install it in your apps, and then it does a little bit of crawling and stuff like that. And it publishes the kind of an adoption dashboard for you. My friends at Luro, who used to run an agency called Paravel, they've created a new tool called Luro that I think is in private beta now, or maybe even private alpha, something like that. Brand new, right?
Out. I'm gonna post the link to everyone. Yeah,
like that also does, among other things, adoption tracking, component tracking, and things like that. So we're seeing a lot of tools come out around those things, which is cool, which is great. The second part of that I want to address, though, is adoption is sort of table stakes for design systems, right? And I think there are a lot of other things that we can track, and maybe fortunately, maybe unfortunately, a lot of the ways to track those things are very qualitative. So I am a big fan, and I think it's crucial to design system work that people talk regularly. People making the design system talk regularly to the people who are using the design system. So I think that there's very little that is better than qualitative interviews, user research, customer research, seeing how they're using it from a tooling standpoint for sure, but also just talking to them about things, because those are the things that don't show up in dashboards that just become really important to the work. So what I generally suggest to teams is having a regular practice of some sort of regular customer research touch point. That could be once a month we talk to 2 customers. That's great. Or one customer we talk to once a month. Weekly we talk to one customer. That's even better. So I'm a big fan of doing doing that. And I think what you start to find is some other things that point at more valuable metrics. One of the things that came up a few years ago when I was working on a team that I love, that I use to this day, is in talking to a customer, one of the things that a customer of the design system, they said something to the effect of, I am more likely to stay at this job now because of using the design system. And I think that's a really big thing, that, like, what if we could tie retention at the company to design system usage? Like, that's a hard thing to track in a dashboard, but if you can track that qualitatively, you can get really good investment internally for your design system, because people are tying it to a more important metric than just adoption. So I think adoption is important and it's table stakes, but to me, a more interesting question is, like, what does adoption unlock? Well, it unlocks us to be more innovative, or it unlocks us to have better retention, or it solves higher order problems in our organization. I think those are the things worth tracking, and then trying to find some causality between the design system and whatever that important higher level metric is.
Timothy Lundgren has a question. Do you have any tips, best practices on distributing design systems and scaling across an organization?
Love that question. Thank you, Timothy, for that. One of the things that is kind of a repeated mantra in the world of design systems is the idea that design systems are a product, right? I think most people, especially working at enterprises and at large scale, are like, yes, it is a product. We agree with that, but they don't treat them like products. And so what do I mean by that is, like, if we think about who makes products in our world, that's usually startups that make products. And so how would a startup distribute their product and scale it across their customer base, right? That's exactly what this question is. Well, what a startup would do is they would release a feature called, usually they call it like an MVP, or, something, a minimum viable product, something like that, as quickly as they could, in order to learn something about it, in order to learn, how do people use this, or are we solving this problem appropriately? And they would release it to not the entire world, but a small subset of people. Right? They would have a private beta of 10 people or 50 people or something like that, and get feedback from those people before releasing it to a larger group, right? So they would show it to a handful of people, allow them to use it, give them some guidance and some training, just as much as they need, and then get some feedback from that, maybe make some changes, and then release it to a larger group. I don't see a lot of design system teams doing that. I think a lot of design system teams go like, okay, we got to do this big initiative where we make a bunch of components, and then one day we're going to like reveal this thing to our entire organization, and open the floodgates. And it's like, well, that seems risky. That seems like a tough thing, because, all of a sudden 0 people are using it, and then another minute 9,000 people are using it. How are you going to deal with that? You have no systems in place to accept that feedback or hear it. And so design system teams very quickly go from a thing that no one uses to a thing that a lot of people want to use, and they're just inundated and paralyzed by those floodgates. So if you treat a design system like a product, where I generally start is release your design system, your initial design system, to 3 teams. Start with 3 teams, because 3 teams know that you're working at scale. There is a scale to that. It's not as big as your larger, your whole organization, but it's not just one team or one person or one engineer, or one designer using it. Release it to 3 teams and see if those 3 teams can use it, and find out if they use it commonly, if there's things that they all do the same, or if there are things that people don't do the same. So you can release it to a small group, and then what you find works with that, then you release it to another 6 teams after that. And then you find what works with that, and then you release it to another 12 teams after that. And so you can work, logarithmically or exponentially, or however you want to release that. But you start with a small group, and you release it to a larger group and a larger group every time, and then you gain confidence as you release it to a larger and larger group. So, don't unveil it all at once. Don't do a big reveal. Do it the way that a startup would release a product, and really solve problems for your customers. I think a lot of people are unfortunately in love with the idea of making a design system more than they are creating a design system that actually works for people and solves their needs and helps them in their work. And so, a lot of people want to do that as a project and release, like, look how beautiful our Figma library is, and how clean our code is, and our storybook and our component library, and really don't prioritize, like, this has to help people. This has to make something easier for them, or better quality for them, or faster, or, something like that. And so, to do it the way that the good startups have done it, I think is a good model to follow.
So here's another question, and you may have touched on this in your prior answer a little bit, but perhaps you have some builds. Allison asks, do you have any suggestions for sharing design system additions or updates that get users, engineers, designers excited? specifically if getting these additions updates requires some engineering work?
I love this this question, because one of the things that and thank you, Allison, for that question. I think one of the things that we forget about design systems in general is that they're products, right? So like if we accept that they're products and treat them like products, well, products have to get marketed. You know, just like if you're releasing a big product and no one knows about it, no one's going to use it. So, you know, that's why organizations have usually product teams and marketing teams. And a lot of organizations, product and marketing are separate efforts altogether, separate enterprises, separate initiatives. And the teams that are doing it, and the companies that are doing it really well, have a more holistic team that can do both, either can do both of those things, or those teams are connected. And the thing about design systems is that what makes it a system as opposed to just a library is things that our systems are connected. So what are you connecting when you have a design system? You might be connecting product and marketing. You might be connecting design and engineering. You might be connecting product and design. You might be connecting content and UX. You know, like, so design systems have the ability to bring those two things together. So if those things are together, then you can work in tandem. So to the question about like, how do you, suggestions for sharing design system updates, that could be as simple as, it's all about your marketing plan. And your marketing plan could be as simple as every time we update, we have a change log that we update. And that might seem really boring and dry to folks. And sometimes it is, but maybe a bunch of us here have probably seen examples of like, there are some companies that make their change log really fun to read. You know, that's an act of marketing. You know, there's some companies where every time a change log comes out, people are like, I want to read through it, because they put jokes in there. They make it interesting. They have like stories that they put in there, and they're not just technical, like we changed this thing and we changed this thing. It's not a bulleted list. So that could be a form of marketing. Outside of that, like you could have an internal email newsletter that has a lot of subscribers, right? And that, again, that's a form of marketing, talking about your product. You could run campaigns internally, to get people excited about using the design system. So there are all these marketing efforts that we can look to. If you look to how products are marketed in our world, right? The world now with design systems is our internal organization usually. So how do we get people excited about it? There's a whole ton of efforts. It could be, you could start a whole Slack group about it. You could have meetups, on Zoom or on, virtually or in person. You could do a road show, so there are all these things that, like, if you think about how a product is marketed in our world, we can kind of adopt some of those ideas and apply them to our design system, and how to get people excited, how to get people up to date and informed about all of these things.
Heidi Stroll asks, sometimes our design system has an underlying rule that doesn't work in a specific circumstance. For example, hover always turns things red, or links are always underlined. How do we decide if we break the rule once as a customization, change the rule, create a new rule, or just live with it?
A rule about making those rules. So this is the rule that I will share. The rule comes from the Ian Fleming novel, the 007 series, the Ian Fleming novel Goldfinger. And in that book, I don't think it was in the movie, but in the book, that there's a line that the villain says to James Bond, and he says, once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, 3 times is a pattern. And I use that a lot in design system world, that 3 times is a pattern. And technically, for those of you who have read the book, I'm paraphrasing a little bit. The actual line is 3 times is enemy action. But I don't know that we want to tell things as enemy action with a design system. So 3 times as a pattern is a translation of that. And so, what the way that I build some bottlenecks, and the way that I build some friction, intentional friction for teams that are like, well, this red underline is not going to work for us, is usually if people ask for it 3 times or more, then the design system team can consider it a change that they will make. Up until that point, if you hear it for the first time, hey, we don't really like this red underline, or it doesn't work for our product or our feature, then what you can do is you can say, great, noted, we'll put that in our backlog. We're not going to do anything about that right now, because our role on our team, the job of our team, our design team, is to work on the most important common problems at our organization. So as of right now, that is not a common enough problem. Once we hear it 2 more times, we will consider it a common enough problem for us to look at. And we'll put it on our roadmap. We'll prioritize it as such, but that's how we create priorities. Is we look at the most common problems, and we want to solve the problems that 10 people are having, as opposed to the problems that one person is having or one team is having. So we want to work on the problems that exist at the highest scale, because that's what our job is here. And then you can also activate some people. Some people will say like, okay, cool, that makes sense. Like, thanks for hearing me out. Other folks will go, you can activate them and you can say, listen, that's the second time that we've heard that, and that doesn't quite meet our criteria for our 3 times. Can you find another team that has the same problem? Because if you can, then we'll move that up in our priority list. And some people will go like, well, no, I don't want to do your work, and that's fine. And some people will go like, oh yeah, that's an important enough problem that I am incentivized to go and help you find a reason to prioritize that. And sometimes they will. So all of that comes from having good boundaries around what the role of the design system team is and is not. And then a public way to prioritize your things. And if you can even have a public roadmap that says like, look, these are our most common problems and this is what we're solving, then people have visibility into that. And then they either sometimes won't ask those questions. They'll go like, there's no way the design system team is going to change this red underlying thing. I'm just going to work on this myself. Or they'll have their expectations set and go like, all right, it looks like, 9 months from now, it'll get to that problem. I can wait 9 months. We can hang on for 9 months, until the design system team gets to that problem. So a lot of that is about expectation setting and then exposing the way that you make prioritized decisions to the rest of the organization.
That's great. Dan, when you said Goldfinger, I thought you might be talking about the quote in the movie where he says, do you expect me to talk? And then Goldfinger comes back and says, no, I expect you to die. That elaborate, laser system that was parodying Austin Powers. So, great.
I'm gonna try and find a way to incorporate that quote into design system work somehow. I haven't quite found that yet.
You should. Cool. And I think Heidi, we highlighted one of your other questions but we'll come back to that one if we have time. So let's move on to one from Maria Vitosevic. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing names right. Accessibility is crucial for creating inclusive customer experiences. What tools do you use to improve and test accessibility in components?
Thank you for that question. Accessibility is super duper important, both ethically, at least in my opinion, and I know in the opinions of a lot of people, and then also legally in a lot of places too. And it's becoming more and more of an important thing. And I wish it was more important to start with. I wish people saw the value of it earlier. I'm glad that more and more people are seeing the value of it now. So I think that's trending in a positive direction. I'm not an accessibility expert. I'm not terribly familiar with too many tools, but I can share with you the ones that I've found to be really good, both in terms of tools and in process. And of course, if anybody else has suggestions, please do put them in the chat, and share your experience and share your knowledge about all these things. To me, the best tool or the best maybe process tool for improving accessibility is usability testing. It's just such an important thing to talk to people and observe them and see what they do in their natural environment. So some form of ethnography, some form of usability testing, and just see how they use your things. There are a lot of tools out there that do a good job of tracking accessibility compliance, but accessibility compliance is only a small part of it's a small subset of what accessibility work is, and that's even a small subset of what true inclusive design actually looks like too. So in terms of being inclusive, especially when it comes to a design system, it's really important because if you do things in an inclusive way and create accessible experiences, then you can create that at scale. That's the good thing about design systems. And then, it's the double-edged sword too. If you create an inaccessible experience, you create that inaccessible experience at scale. So that's why it is such an important part of design systems. And so doing it well is an important thing. And just testing with people, I think, exposes a lot of things that compliance tools don't. With compliance tools, you can test things like color contrast. You can test things like screen reader and assistive device usage. You can test all things like that, and that's good. Those are good things to have. I like tools like Craft is a great tool. Stark is a great tool for that. It's a wonderful plugin for Figma, and then they also have a ton of suite of tools that you can use as well. There are lots of in-browser plugins you can use like Wave and Axe. All of those things are really good. But again, a lot of those things relate specifically to the compliance part of accessibility. When you are usability testing with folks and seeing how they're using things, you see things and you hear things about people who have low vision, and you see things and you hear things about people who have a motor disability, whether it's temporary or permanent, right? Those are things that don't come up as easily in some of those compliance tools. So even just testing on your own, like one of the tips that I've heard long ago that sticks with me is just tabbing through your interface exposes a lot of accessibility problems, that you're like, oh, I can't get to this field if I tab, or I can't close this modal just using the keyboard only. So even just trying to use an interface that you design or that you build with the keyboard is a great way to do that. So I tend to rely on a lot of process tools, and then ideally working with an accessibility expert or accessibility specialist, people who are good at that. There are more and more of them these days, which I think is awesome. So working with people and collaborating with people who have that expertise, I think, is an important part of the inclusive design on your team. And then certainly including people who have the disabilities or the abilities of the people that you are trying to serve with the things that you're making. So, those are the things, the tools and the processes that I tend to lean on.
Just to build on that too, in chat, I posted a link to Fable, which has some really great accessibility tools and services. They're a sponsor of the Design Better podcast, and they're great folks. So worth checking them out.
Awesome. I was going to do the same thing, Aaron. You got ahead of me. Justin Flax asked, how is the process different when comparing documentation for design systems versus brand systems?
That's a tough question. Thank you, Justin, for that. And hello, Justin. Justin's a Philly native. I'll tell you what, Justin was one of my managers when I was an intern. And so Justin is an OG here as well, doing great work at Wharton. So thanks for that question, Justin. What I tend to see in the difference between design system documentation and brand system documentation is oftentimes brand system documentation tends to be more static. That's not to say that it should be more static. It's just what I've seen as like historically. So brand documentation tends to be a lot of times is delivered in a PDF, or a lot of times is delivered as a digital document that you're designed to read. I think there's an opportunity for design system documentation to be a lot more interactive. So if you look at the trend, you look at big public design systems like Material Design or the Salesforce Lightning Design System or Shopify's Polaris or things like that. A lot of them have reference websites that are public at their own public URL. So material.io, polaris.shopify.com, lightningdesignsystem.com. They are public, and most of them are designed to be read. One of the trends that I see, and it's a small trend right now, but I hope that it gets larger and I hope that it gets more popular, is a lot of teams on their reference sites are building tools now to help people understand their design systems better and how to work with them. So it's not just read this document, be familiar with the prop structure or the file structure or the plugins or components or things like that. It is those things too, but a lot of folks that I've seen are building playgrounds, and so test out this component, check these props on and off. Storybook is a good example of that. Has a lot of that functionality built in through knobs and things like that. Figma has a lot of that stuff built in that you have to configure through things like variants and now the new variables functionality. And I've seen a lot of people playing with that to go try out this component. It's like a try before you buy mentality. I don't see that a lot in brand systems. Brand systems is a lot of rules in those generally. And again, I'm stereotyping and overgeneralizing, but a lot of brand system documentation tends to be, you do it like this, you don't do it like this. And what I'm encouraged by with design system documentation in particular is that people are going give it a shot. See what it looks like to have no image in this thing. See what it looks like to add a kicker or to add 2 paragraphs instead of 1 or 3 buttons instead of 2, and you get to see this configuration and configurability, of this is as far as I can take this component without it being maybe a new component or being a different variant or variation or something like that. And I think because design systems are inherently digital, at least the ones that I tend to work on, I think there's a lot more opportunity to go before I use this, I want to see if it actually works for me. And if it doesn't, that's okay. I'll build my own version, or I'll use this as a starting point and kind of fork off of that. But I like seeing this kind of playground mentality of documentation being you can see the limits of how this stretches and perhaps even add and augment that, if you want. I think that I didn't see a question in the chat about this, which I think is surprising, but maybe it'll come up. I think AI has a big role in that in the future, in being able to help people envision what they can do with design systems, not just here's what's in the can, you can use these or not, but being able to even do things like combine things that don't even exist yet and request them. An example that's not related to design systems that I saw recently is I think it's Jennifer Daniel over at Google created the emoji kitchen. I don't know if you all have seen this yet, but it's basically, you can basically say like this emoji plus this emoji equals a new emoji, and it's like you can create these emoji from scratch based on two different existing things. You can create something new from two different existing things. I'm like, isn't that the idea of design systems? You can create something new with these two existing things. So one day I would love to see, component kitchen somewhere that's like, what would it look like if I combine these two? And I think as humans, we have limited capacity to create the multitude of variations, but AI is really good at that kind of stuff. So if we can train it well enough, perhaps we can use AI to even come up with permutations that we haven't envisioned. Some of it's going to be garbage and we can decide to throw those away. And some of those I think are going to be interesting enough for us to go like, oh, let's do a sprint around this because, we hadn't considered this use case or this visualization or this way to display this thing. So, generally that's the stuff that I've seen as the difference between design system documentation and brand system documentation is that design system documentation is trending to be more interactive than brand system documentation.
Surya is asking a pretty big question, and we can also point her to some resources, but she says, hi from Indonesia. I'm a product designer. Can you explain step by step how to create a new design system in collaboration with dev team for an early product?
Oh boy, you all know that I'm long-winded already, so I'm going to try to give this as a short answer. This is a big question, but a step by step to creating a new design system. What I would do, so for most people working at an enterprise or at a company that doesn't have a design system, what you probably have is a ton of products that already exist that people are using and no system that kind of connects to all of them, right? If you're at a startup and you have no product yet and you want to create a design system from scratch at first, before you have anything, first of all, I would recommend you not do that. And I can get into that if you want. But that's a different use case altogether. So I'm going to talk about the first use case, which is, I work at Nike and we don't have a design system, or I work at, big company that has lots of products and we don't have a design system. The first thing that I would do is I would do an audit, which I think is a thing that's probably a lot of people's first instinct. Do an audit of all of the things that exist, or as many things as you can, that exist already, and then try to spot commonalities. Because one of the things that I've learned in my design system work is there is always a system that exists. It just might not be documented and it might not be recognized yet. But there's always something there. And that could be like, hey, all of these teams are using this same color. All of these teams are using this same icon or set of icons, and it might not be all, but at least it's enough to say like, this is pretty common. This happens pretty commonly. And so I think the job of a design system team is not to create new components on behalf of the organization, but to actually collect and recognize and make official the systems that already exist. And so, if you find that like, well, all of these teams are using this same color, well, that's a good opportunity to then make that color official. And a lot of teams do that with a design token. They'll say, we're going to create a design token that can be implemented and installed in any different app, but it basically puts our brand red in one place so that not every team has their own version of it, their own original of it, but they have an instance that all ties back to this one. And that way, if we ever change this one, it can cascade out to all the places that it's being used. So that's the case for that could be like a color token. For some teams, it's like everyone is using kind of this similar select menu, and it's a custom one, and it all kind of has this. So what you can do as the first step is just put that one component in one place. And I think a lot of teams think that their design system can't possibly be one component. That's, material design has hundreds of components. I think a design system that has one component that saves people an hour of time is a really great start. I think that's a very valuable thing to do, because when you first start a design system, you're not going to save teams weeks of time creating, months of time creating interfaces. It's early. So do one thing, and again, it's back to that product mentality. Do one thing that solves a problem for a handful of folks. And then if that works, then scale that solution. A lot of people, I think, have a speculative solution that can potentially help a lot of people, but they have no evidence of that. But they still build it anyway. Oh, we're going to build hundreds of components or dozens of components and release it 6 months from now. And, there'll be everything for people to use in there that they need. Well, you didn't even test that, though. You didn't even test that once. So what if you built one component, you put it in one place, you talk to 3 teams about it, You see if it actually can help them, and if it works, then you go to 6 teams after that. So that's the way that I would start. From a step-by-step standpoint. Step 1 is do an audit. Step 2 is pick one thing that is common, put it into place, and see if people can interact with it. And then steps 3 through infinity is rinse and repeat. Scale that solution, rinse and repeat from there. I think you're muted, Aaron. I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. I'm curious if you have thoughts about how teams can keep design systems that are built out in Figma in sync with design systems that are built out in code. How do we keep those two things linked?
Unfortunately, I have an unpopular answer to that. I wish that there were more tools that did this. There are not, at least not ones that I've found. So if anybody's found tools that keep code libraries and design tool libraries like Figma or Sketch or anything like that in sync, please do mention it in the chat. Recommend it to me. If anybody's working on something like that, I'd love to see it. I haven't found any good tools to do that. I would think that that's going to change in the near future. I think that there's a lot of companies that I think are interested in solving that problem, and in the next 5 years we might see that. But right now, there's no good thing to do. So what I tell teams to do instead is to keep the smallest library that you can, specifically in Figma. If you're going to have one big library of a lot of components, then let it be in code, because code is working software that people can interact with, and keep your Figma libraries really, really small if you can. What that means is it requires a process change for a lot of teams, because that requires you building in the browser more, or doing a lot of workshopping together and pair designing in the browser, things like that with designers and engineers. Some teams just don't have a culture of being able to do that, so that's a tough thing. And then some teams do. It's a little bit easier for them. But what is easier than maintaining and keeping in sync 100 components? What's easier than keeping 100 components in sync? Keeping 50 components in sync. What's easier than keeping 50 components in sync? Keeping 25 components in sync. So because we don't have a tool to solve that problem, we need to solve it in our process. And what I see a lot of teams doing is building in silos. Designers will build this mansion in Figma of like hundreds and hundreds of components and variants and props. And Figma is so powerful, and it's so awesome that it can do that. And then engineers will do the same thing in code. They have tons of variants and libraries and modifications and props and configurability and all that stuff in Storybook, and the two don't talk to each other. And then they only realize after they've built these mansions in these two places, like, oh, these mansions need to connect. And it's like, well, we don't have this room over there, so we don't have a way to do that. And they find themselves in the situation where they are like, we just have too much that we can't keep in sync. So as I've talked to a bunch of mature design system teams, a lot of what they are doing is actually removing components from their design system. So like a lot of them have like gone up to 100 components, and then in the next year of their roadmap, they're going like, we're actually trying to go down to 56. And I'm like, well, why are you trying to go down to 56? And we just can't keep 100 in sync. And we also can't support 100 when a bunch of people are using all 100 of those, and they want support. They want modifications. They want changes. They want bug fixes, as they all should. But we just can't support those. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to go to smaller libraries that solve more of the common stuff. And, there's a good principle around this, which is called the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, which says something to the effect of, I'm going to get it wrong, but I'll paraphrase. It says something to the effect of like, 80% of the effects in your system are actually governed by probably 20% of your assets. So if it's only governed by 20% of your assets, can you kill the other 80%, or at least deprioritize them somehow? And so if you maintain a smaller library, work on a smaller library, it's just easier to keep that in sync. I want to say one other thing about that, though, is there are tools that are coming out that help this. A good example is there's a great plugin for Figma called HTML to Design, which is basically you can take a piece of code that is rendered in HTML, you run it through the plugin, and the plugin creates a Figma file for you. So it's like, that's a great thing, a great way for one side of the equation to affect the other. The thing that it doesn't do, at least not that I know of, and I haven't seen tools that do this, is there's nothing that round trips, right? There's nothing that says, okay, let's use code, generate the Figma file, and then if I change the Figma file, it should update the code too, right? Or the other way around. Let's create a Figma file. We can generate the code. There's a lot of tools that do that. But if I make a change in the code, will it go back and update the Figma file? It won't yet. So I think the first company or the first plugin or product or whatever that can solve the round tripping thing, I think they're going to be the ones that win all of this. And so I think that's the thing that we're still looking for, is I can make a change in one place and it affects the others. Or I can make a change in the other place and it affects the one. We just haven't seen any good, or I haven't seen any good examples of that yet.
Yeah, I can't wait to see that come out someday. But question here from Camilo Matos. I'm diving into tokens for a new design system and seeking guidance. How do you best name and organize your semantic tokens to ensure flexibility and prevent potential roadblocks? For example, running out of t-shirt sizes due to numerous padding spaces as a simple example. Thanks.
Boy, thank you for this question. Whenever I give my answer to this question, no one likes the answer. So I'm going to give an answer here that I think, a lot of you are going to be like, I mean, I'm not going to do that. So, take this with a grain of salt. First of all, I am a believer that design tokens are not a foundational aspect of design systems. I think that design tokens can be layered in after, and I think that they should be layered in after, which is a tough idea because, when you think about them, they are the smallest building block of design systems. You build, if you follow an atomic design principle or something like that, you build atoms off of, I've heard some people call tokens subatoms, and it makes sense that, if the design tokens are your colors and your typography and your spacing, those are the smallest pieces that your bigger components are built off of. So I think naturally a lot of people think, well, then we've got to start with those, right? We got to start with the small things and then they combine into larger things and larger things and larger things. That's atomic design, right? Well, first, Brad Frost, who came up with atomic design, doesn't really teach atomic design that way, at least not that I've seen. He talks about actually starting with the larger pieces and then breaking them down into the smaller pieces, not start with the small pieces and build them up into the larger pieces. And there's a lot of systems theory and systems thinking that sort of says, like, you don't really start with the small pieces. You start with the big pieces and deconstruct them. You don't start with the small pieces and then construct them, right? You sort of begin with the end in mind there. So that's one piece of it. Tokens for a new system are very, very difficult because you don't have any commonalities yet. So, what I see a lot of times is that people will define like t-shirt sizes, like they'll still do extra small, medium, large, extra large, right? And that's 5 or 6 different steps that you can have. And then they realize a month later, oh man, we need a 7th, we need an 8th, because we have that many variations. So what do? Almost every design system that I've seen has a medium 2 in it. All right, extra small, medium 2, large, extra large. And that makes it tough for people to guess how to use the system. Is there a medium 3? Is there a large 2? No, there's not. So why is it there? So it makes it hard for people to know what to expect in a system. So that's why I always layer in design tokens as a later step, after the design system is built, because I try to find, what do people already call this thing? They call it brand red, or they call it royal purple. So that's what we should name that design token. We should call it royal purple, even though the technical name for that is hyacinth or is, whatever it is. This is what people are calling it. So it's a very much like a pave the cow paths mentality to design tokens. Let's call this what people already call it, whatever the nickname of it is. And so this is the story that I always tell that gets, that people hate, which is that I worked with a team that had a component in their design system, and the name of that component was called Fred. That was the name. And what was Fred? Fred was actually what other people call like a slider. I think that's the most common name for it, which a row of thumbnails and then arrows on each side that slide them left to right. Well, they called that Fred, and they've used the name Fred for 7 years. If you go on their website right now, I worked with them 8 years ago. I'm sorry, more than 7 years. I worked with them 8 years ago. They had already had the name Fred at that point for that component. And if you go to the website today, you can view source and you can see it's called Fred. Div class equals Fred. And there's a lot of people that are like, that is not the right name for that component. And they're right. You're right. That's not the right name for it, but it gets the job done, right? Everybody knows what it is. Everybody knows where to find it and how to use it and what it does. And that's really the job of a component or a design token or something like that. I'm not advocating for saying, well, name all of your components Fred and Sally and George and Bill. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is pick a name that people have already adopted. Then you don't have to worry about adoption. Right? If you do something that people have already adopted, then you just hop on board that train, right? It's already going. Where I think a lot of teams like find themselves stuck in well, we got to find the right semantic, objective, intuitive name for this. And a lot of times there just isn't that, or there is that, but now you have to campaign around it to get people to use that name. And that effort is just not effort well spent. So I'm getting away from the question a little bit, but to the question about how do you best name and organize semantic tokens, I try to name them what people already call them. If there's something that people don't already call that, I would do exercises and workshops to find that out, as opposed to, well, the objective semantic name for this is a toast. But some people know it as notification though, right? So how do we have good wayfinding systems to do that? A lot of times I try to find a thing that's already adopted and then try to hop on board with that.
Yeah.
Question. Oh, go ahead, Aaron. Sorry.
I was just going to say we have about just enough time for one more question. So Eli, choose a good one here.
Yeah. Okay. Pressure is on. I'll also say, and I'm kind of in advance volunteering Dan for this, but we might be able to send him a few questions after the fact, and then we'll post them in our newsletter or somewhere so you all can find them. Okay. Actually, I'm going to put that on you, Dan. Is there a question here that you see that you particularly would like to answer?
Yeah. Let me look. So some questions about flexibility. Let me talk about that. Okay. I want to take this one from Kurt. Kurt has a question that says, what's a strategy for refactoring an existing partial and or faulty design system for a product that has 5 years of code behind it? I'm having trouble convincing dev teams to prioritize product quality over product capability. This is such an important question because I think there's so many teams that face some equivalent of this question. It might not be exactly this, but some equivalent of this. The reason that design systems are so hard, I'm going to appear to answer a different question, and I'll come back to this. The reason that design systems are so difficult for some teams is design systems are, I think it was Lauren Lepret who said this in one of her talks, I think at one of the Clarity conferences. She said, design systems are culture change disguised as a UI kit. And I think they nailed it. Design systems are cultural artifacts, right? Because what you're doing is you're saying, this is how we work. And this is how we have worked in the past. This is how we work now. This is how we want to work more of in the future, right? So it's some combination of those things. So when this question says to me that there's a culture there that actually rejects refactoring, right? And I've worked with a lot of teams that what they want to do is they want to design or build something correctly the first time so they don't have to go back to it and touch it again. And it's like, that's admirable. I've almost never seen that work. And there's a whole school of thought that says, rather than spending a ton of time planning, right? People spend 6 months planning so that they can do it once. We'll spend 6 hours planning and then just build in that time to refactor, right? You actually get farther, faster that way. You just have to get your head around that idea. That's the toughest part about it is no one wants to think that they're doing it wrong, right? And refactoring has a little bit of that in it. Like, we missed it the first time, so we have to go back and refactor. So you have to reframe that mindset for a lot of people that refactoring is not about doing it wrong. That's product design, right? It's iteration. It's learning a thing and then being able to react to that learning. So, and that culture is, if you have that culture, if you have that frame of mind on your team, that's what gives the ability to do real agile, because that's what agile is, to do real product design. I'm not invalidating other forms of that. I'm not trying to say that. What I'm trying to say is, if you can adopt and create a culture that we're always going to go back and touch something at some point, right? Then you reduce legacy stuff, right? Then you're able to prioritize better. Then you're able to say, we're just not going to do that thing anymore, right? Because that's no longer our priority. Our priority is we're going to continue to improve over and over again for the entire life of our company. So back to this question now, what's the strategy for refactoring an existing partial and or faulty design system for a product that has 5 years of code behind it? If you have the culture to do that, then it's already going to be a part of the process. One of the things that I suggest to teams is a split between what I call flow weeks and systems weeks. So, and the split that I suggest is 3-to-1. For every month, assuming that months generally have 4 weeks in them, you spend 3 weeks doing component work and working with teams and helping them implement stuff in their new features and the new products and all that stuff. And then for one of those weeks, the design system team just does housekeeping. We're not going to work with teams. We're not going to give them new components. We're not going to support them on this week. The last week of the month is a week for us. And we're just going to tidy up our closet, right? We're just going to go and refactor some old stuff. We're just going to update legacy code. We're just going to, tweak the performance of this thing. It's just time for us. And I see design system teams, they over-index on that when they start. They go all of the time is for us. We're going to just build components and not at all talk to the teams that are going to use them. And I suggest flipping that mentality. So where I think this kind of strategy works and can be implemented is if you are able to create a culture that's like, we're just always going to refactor, right? And then the bar to refactoring lowers. The last week of the month is refactor week across our company, not just for design systems, not just for product team, but like across our company, the last week of the month is refactor week. That's hard to do because that's culture change, and that affects more than just, you know, the 4 people working on the design system or the handful of people working on those components. It affects how everyone does work. But that's what you're trying to do with a design system anyway, is you're trying to affect how everyone does work. And so that work is hard, but I think that work is worthy work, and work that's worth doing.
Fantastic, Dan. As we're coming to the close here, we want to make sure you get a chance to mention something that you're working on, which I think is super relevant to all the folks that ask questions here. So tell us about Design System University.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for asking about that. In these AMAs, we always run out of time, right? We always run out of time because there's more questions to answer than time to answer them. People want to know about design systems. They struggle with design systems, but they're okay with struggling with design systems. They don't want to, but they're okay with it because they see the potential of design systems. So, you know, I've seen that over and over again with the teams that I work with, and also the teams that I don't work with, just like observing Twitter and reading Reddit on how people are talking about design systems. There's so much support that's needed for people that's working in this because the potential is really good for them. So I started Design System University as a way to support people in what they're doing with design systems in different ways. You know, so it's early. It's been out for I launched about 3 months ago, you know, in June. And what I wanted to build there is to support people in different ways. Some people learn through curriculum and courses. Some people learn through community and accountability. Some people learn through discussion. Some people learn through guest talks. Some people learn through books, you know, and written material. So what I wanted to create with Design System University is a fully rounded support system for people that are working in design systems.
Cool. And I think we have a little offer for folks here that are on the that we can share a special link or code.
We do. Yes. Thank you for asking about that. So Design System University is a monthly membership. Courses are separate, so you don't have to be a member to purchase the courses or work with any of the courses. If you want to be part of the community, that's a monthly fee for that. And for everybody listening to this AMA and everybody here, we have a special code for you that takes some. So I think it's I forget what it is off the top of my head, 25% or something like that off of the monthly community cost. So if you use the coupon code Design Better, all one word, all uppercase, lowercase works too, all one word, no spaces, Design Better. When you check out, if you want to join the Design System University community, it'll take 25% off of the monthly community fee.
Fantastic. Awesome. Dan, thank you so much for joining. And thanks everybody who joined for our first AMA. This was super fun. If you haven't already answered our poll, we'd love to know what topics you'd like us to cover next. We have 2 already in the can that scheduled. Next week, we're talking to Judy Wirt about career, navigating difficult situations at work. The week after that, we're talking to Debbie Millman about foundations, which is going to be great as well. And Eli, we've got some interesting episodes that have recently released and stuff that's coming out as well.
Yeah. So if you didn't catch it last week, we had David Sedaris, who I think the 3 of us at least are big fans of. And I'm sure a lot of folks out there too follow his work. He's just hilarious and actually has some really relevant stuff for us as designers and creatives. And that was our first in the series on the creative process that we're doing. Next week, we're releasing an episode with Ed Catmull, who is the co-founder of Pixar. Also has a lot of obviously great tips for creative folks, and also, you know, kind of creative leadership is a big part of what we talk about. And then more down the road, OK Go, a super creative band. Who else, Aarron?
Tycho, another creative thinker. You know, he's a graphic designer and a musician. So just some amazing folks. Jonathan Heffler, Paula Schur. It's an amazing lineup. So if you haven't subscribed to the podcast already, just search for Design Better wherever you listen. And if you haven't subscribed at designbetterpodcast.com, subscribe there. We'll keep you posted on new episodes that come out. Thanks for joining, everybody. I hope you have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Dan.
And thank you, Dan. Yeah.